I started working for Mr. Walters 2 years ago. At first, it was just supposed to be temporary, a few hours a week cleaning his big, silent house on Sycamore Hill. But then time passed, and suddenly I was still there. Same routine, same silence, same man. I was 25 when I took the job. Jamie had just turned 3. We had just moved to this small Oregon town after a messy year in Phoenix, too many broken promises, too many nights where dinner was crackers and orange juice. I didn't want to raise my son around people who couldn't remember his birthday or where we lived, so we packed up and left. Sycamore Hill sat on the edge of town like it didn't want to belong to anyone. The house was old, but it had good bones. Just like Mr. Walters, I guess. He was in his 60s, maybe older. A widower, retired military. He never said much, just nodded when I came in and left an envelope with my name on the kitchen counter every other Friday. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just existed like the walls around him. I never called him Frank, even though he told me I could. It didn't feel right. He was too formal for that. Too contained. He wore pressed shirts every day, even when he wasn't going anywhere, and he always stood when I entered a room, even if he didn't say anything. That small act told me he hadn't forgotten how to be decent. My job was simple. Clean the house, wash the linens, keep the windows streak-free. Sometimes I'd dust old medals in his office, or stack the unopened letters he never seemed to read. He never asked about my life, and I never offered it. But every Wednesday, at exactly 4:58 p.m., I'd put on my coat, clock out, and head into town with a grocery bag tucked under my arm. That was the one part of my schedule I never shifted. I thought he never noticed. Turns out, he did. That night started like any other. But by the time it ended, everything I thought I knew about Mr. Walters, about how invisible I'd become, about the distance between strangers, it all unraveled. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to be seen. I don't think he meant to start watching me, at least not at first, but there was something about routine that made me feel safe. And when you live most of your life off balance, a pattern can be the only thing that keeps you upright. Every Wednesday, without fail, I finished work at 4:45. I'd wipe down the kitchen counters one last time, rinse out the mop bucket and fold the last dish towel like it mattered. Then I'd put on my coat same one, every season, and leave by 4:58. Never 5:01, never 4:30, always 4:58. I'd walk the same path down Sycamore Hill, past the empty bus stop, across Maple Street, and disappear behind the old laundromat on Jefferson, where nobody looked twice. I thought I was invisible. Honestly, I tried to be. Most people assumed I had somewhere important to go, a second job maybe. But the truth was, it was the only part of my week that didn't feel like survival. And then one day, in the middle of folding a flannel sheet, I caught him watching the clock, not glancing at it, not checking the time, watching it. His back was to the window, the late sun making shadows across the kitchen floor, and yet I saw his eyes flick upward once, twice as the minute hand moved toward 5. I pretended not to notice, but I felt it like a shift in gravity. That same day, he asked if I'd need Thursday off. It was the first time he'd acknowledged that my life existed outside that house. I told him no, thanked him, and left on time, as always. But something was different now. He was paying attention, and attention can be dangerous, especially when you've worked hard to keep parts of yourself hidden. I didn't know if he was curious, or suspicious, or just lonely. But I felt his eyes on the clock every Wednesday after that, and though he never asked again where I went, I could feel the question humming between us like a low radio station you can't quite tune out. I didn't think it mattered, until the night it did. It was the first cold Wednesday of fall. The kind of evening where the air bites at your cheeks and even the trees seem to huddle together. I remember tugging Jamie's hat down tighter over his ears as we walked, his little boots crunching over dead leaves that lined the sidewalk like rust-colored feathers. He was humming some song from his preschool class, swinging the grocery bag back and forth like it was filled with treasure. Inside was a pot of soup I'd started at noon: chicken, rice, carrots, and garlic. I always made enough to share. We turned the corner behind the laundromat and entered through the back door of the church basement, like we did every week. There was no sign, no program, no funding, just a room, a table, and a handful of people who had nowhere else to be. I set the pot down and pulled out the stack of mismatched bowls I'd found at the thrift store. Jamie helped me unroll the plastic spoons, his tongue poking out in concentration. It was our ritual. I didn't see him at first, not until Jamie whispered, "Mama, someone's at the window." I turned. Just a flash. A dark coat, a silhouette, standing outside the foggy basement window, barely visible through the streaks of condensation. But I knew it was him, Frank Walters. I didn't panic. I didn't wave or shout. I just turned back to the pot and started ladling soup. Because what else was there to do? He didn't come in. He didn't knock. He just stood there, watching, maybe for 10 minutes, maybe for 1. And then he was gone. But everything had changed. Later that night, after Jamie fell asleep on the couch at home, still smelling faintly of soup and crayons, I sat by the window and thought about what he must have seen. A tired young woman serving food to strangers, a boy with second-hand boots passing out napkins, a room full of people who'd fallen through the cracks. No announcements, no donations, just quiet kindness. Maybe he saw more than I wanted him to. Maybe he saw the truth of me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure if that was good or bad. The next morning, I expected silence. I expected him to pretend like it hadn't happened. That was his way. But when I walked into the kitchen, there was a note on the counter next to my paycheck. It said, "Let me know if you need more carrots next week." No signature. Just that. And somehow, that changed everything. The next day, I almost skipped work. I told myself Jamie might be coming down with something, or that I could make up the hours Friday. But really, I didn't want to face him. Not after he'd seen all of that. But rent doesn't care how you feel. So I walked up Sycamore Hill like I always did, trying to pretend nothing had changed. When I opened the front door, the house was quiet, same as always. I hung my coat, slipped off my shoes, and started toward the laundry room. Then I heard his voice from the kitchen. "Do you drink tea?" I froze. Not hello, not good morning, just that. I turned the corner and saw him standing there, sleeves rolled up, 2 mugs already on the counter. Steam curled from the kettle like it had been waiting for me. Yeah, sometimes." "Sit," he said, not unkindly. "Won't take long." He poured the tea like he'd done it 100 times. No sugar, no small talk, just a quiet space between 2 people who suddenly knew too much about each other. I wrapped my hands around the mug. It was too hot to drink, but I held it anyway. Something to do with my fingers. He didn't ask about last night, didn't mention the window, or Jamie, or the soup. Instead, he said, "That kid of yours, he's got good manners." I blinked. "Thanks. I try." "You're doing more than trying." And that was it. We sat in silence after that, both of us sipping carefully, like whatever we were drinking might crack something open. When I stood to leave, he didn't stop me, just nodded, like always. But when I walked back down the hill, something sat heavier in my chest. He hadn't asked me a single question, but somehow I felt more seen than if he'd asked 100. The second time we had tea, I was the one who spoke first. "I didn't think you'd show up," I said, sliding into the same kitchen chair as before. "I said Thursday's work," he replied, setting the mug down in front of me like it was an order, not an offer. But his eyes were softer this time, less like stone, more like smoke. We didn't call them meetings. They weren't scheduled. But somehow, by the second Thursday, we both knew it was going to happen again. This time, I brought muffins. Blueberry, from a box, but I added extra vanilla and a pinch of cinnamon like my mom used to. Jamie called them magic muffins, even though I always told him the only magic was getting the oven to heat evenly. Frank took a bite, nodded once, then looked out the window. "You cook for all those people every week?" I hesitated. That was the first real question he'd asked. "Yeah," I said. "I mean, I try. Some weeks it's just rice and beans. Some weeks it's soup. Depends what I can make stretch." He didn't say anything for a while, just sipped. "Jamie's part of it too?" he asked. "Always," I said. I want him to understand that we don't give because we have everything. We give because we've been through enough to know how much it matters. Frank nodded slowly, as if that explained something he'd always wondered. I wasn't planning to go deeper, but once the words started coming, I couldn't hold them in. "His dad died when Jamie was 2, I said. "Motorcycle crash. Wasn't wearing a helmet. We'd just moved in together. I was 23. Thought we had time." Frank didn't flinch. He didn't offer a sorry or a Bible verse or any of the things people say when they don't know what to say. He just looked at me and said, "And now you show up. Every day." I smiled, a little bitter. "That's the job." "No," he said. "That's who you are." I stared down at the crumbs on my plate, unsure what to do with kindness that didn't feel forced. "That's why you cook?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. I think feeding people is the one thing I can still control. Life takes enough. A bowl of soup shouldn't be one of them." The kettle hissed again. The mug was warm in my hands, and for the first time in years, so was I. The next Thursday, there was a bag of groceries waiting on the counter when I walked in. No note, no fanfare. Just a paper bag filled with onions, carrots, celery, potatoes, soup things. I stared at it for a full minute before saying anything. Frank came in from the garage like nothing was out of place, wiping his hands on a rag. "You left your list last week," he said, like that explained it. "I didn't make a list," I replied. "You mentioned carrots," he said simply, and moved past me to the coffee machine. I almost smiled. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I know." Silence again. Comfortable this time. "I just figure if you're feeding a crowd, you shouldn't have to do it alone." He didn't look at me when he said it, just poured himself coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. I nodded, unsure how to answer without getting emotional, so instead, I unpacked the groceries and began sorting them into 2 piles, some for my fridge, some for Sunday's batch. Later, while wiping down the windowsills, I found another bag tucked by the mudroom door. Dry beans, pasta, lentils. Staples. He never mentioned it. I never thanked him directly. But the next week, the bag was there again. And again after that. Sometimes there'd be little extras fresh herbs, or a small bottle of olive oil, or a roll of foil. Not flashy, just thoughtful. Like someone had been watching closely enough to know where the gaps were. One Thursday, he asked casually, "How many people usually come by?" "Depends," I said. 10, sometimes 15. He nodded. "I was thinking maybe we could fix up the church stove. I've got some tools. And time." I turned to look at him, surprised. "You want to help?" He shrugged. "It's a sad excuse for a stove." But that wasn't what he meant. We both knew it. He wasn't just offering to fix a burner. He was stepping into a space I never thought anyone would notice. And for someone like Frank, that said more than any speech ever could. The church basement always smelled like damp wood and old coffee. The stove was ancient one coil, half dead, the pilot light unpredictable, the knobs rubbed blank with time. But it worked. Mostly. Until the day it didn't. That night, the soup barely simmered. We served it anyway, lukewarm and apologetic. I tried to smile through it, but it felt like failing. The next morning, I found Frank in his garage, sleeves rolled up, surrounded by boxes I'd never seen before. Extension cords, a boxed convection unit, copper pipe, a brand new kitchen hood still wrapped in plastic. He didn't say anything when I walked in. "You're fixing the stove?" I asked, more statement than question. "I'm replacing it," he said without looking up. "That one's a fire hazard." I blinked. Where did all this come from? "Army taught me how to fix field kitchens," he said. "Church kitchens aren't much different." He kept working. No fanfare, no explanation, just doing. By Sunday, the old stove was gone. In its place, something that actually looked functional, modest, clean, humming like it meant business. I stood there staring, half laughing. "You didn't have to." "I know." Jamie tugged on my sleeve, eyes wide. "Mama, it looks like the one in school." Frank crouched beside him. "This one's better." He ruffled Jamie's hair awkwardly and straightened up fast, like kindness made him uncomfortable. Later that night, I asked the pastor how the church had managed to fund it. He scratched his head and said, "Funny thing. Anonymous donation came in. Covered the stove, hood, even the electrician. No idea who." I did. I never brought it up. Frank never confirmed it. But every Wednesday after that, the soup boiled faster. The pans didn't burn. Jamie had a clean counter to stack the napkins on. The room felt cared for. And so did I. People always say, "You're so strong." They mean it as a compliment. I know that. But sometimes it sounds like a sentence. Like there's no other option. Like breaking down isn't allowed. The year Jamie was born was the year everything else collapsed. I was a junior in college, studying early childhood education. The plan was clear. Finish school, get certified, teach somewhere quiet, maybe open a small learning center one day. I was never one for big dreams. Just stable ones. Then I met Ryan. He wasn't the type of guy I was supposed to fall for. Tattooed, rode a motorcycle, didn't own a calendar. But he had this reckless kind of warmth, the kind that made you feel seen, even on your worst days. We moved in together fast. Too fast. I was pregnant before I'd even memorized his middle name. We both panicked at first. Then we bought a crib, and it felt like hope again. He picked out the name Jamie, said it sounded strong but kind, just like he wanted our son to be. I dropped to part-time in school, picked up evening shifts at a diner. We made it work, in that messy, beautiful way you do when you're young and broke, but in love. Then one Friday night, he didn't come home. I woke up at 3 a.m. to a knock on the door, and I already knew. The kind of knowing that settles deep in your stomach before words confirm it. They said he took a curve too fast. No helmet. Instant. Jamie was 6 months old. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor that night, holding a bottle of baby shampoo and crying so hard I couldn't breathe. Not because I missed Ryan, though I did, but because I didn't know how to raise a child and grieve at the same time. The bills piled up. School slipped through my fingers. I tried to go back for a semester, but childcare was too expensive, and my brain was fog. I started cleaning houses, at first just to get by, then to survive, then because it became the only thing I could count on. By the time Jamie turned 3, we'd moved 5 times. I didn't hang pictures anymore, didn't bother learning neighbors' names. It felt safer that way. Then came Sycamore Hill. Frank's house was the first place that didn't feel temporary. Not warm, exactly, but still enough for me to catch my breath. It's funny. You spend years thinking your story's behind you, but sometimes all it takes is a new stove and an old man watching the way you stir soup to remind you you're still becoming someone. Jamie loved soup night. He called it the sharing place. Every Wednesday, like clockwork, we'd walk the 2 blocks from our apartment to the old church basement, his tiny hand gripping mine, his backpack bouncing with napkins and plastic spoons. I tried to make it feel like an adventure. I didn't want him growing up thinking kindness was a burden. I wanted him to see it the way I was finally starting to like a form of quiet power. He took his job seriously, unrolling napkins one by one, stacking them into little triangles, handing out juice boxes like they were sacred gifts. The people adored him, especially Mr. Cal, an older man who used to teach math before his wife died and he stopped going home. "Your boy's got a good heart," he told me once. "Don't let the world wear it out." That night, I noticed something strange. Jamie nudged me while I was stirring a pot of lentil stew. "Mama, he's back." I turned toward the stairs. Frank was standing just outside the doorway to the basement. Not in the room, not at the table, just at the edge, like a shadow trying not to disturb the light. He stood there with his hands behind his back, eyes scanning the room, taking it in like a battlefield he couldn't enter. He never spoke, never waved, just watched. Every week after that, he was there. Same spot, same stance, never more than 5 minutes, never less than 2. Sometimes I caught his eye. He never looked away. At first, I felt exposed, like I was under inspection. But after a while, it started to feel like something else. Presence, not performative, not possessive, just constant. It was the kind of watching that didn't demand anything, that didn't interrupt or explain itself. The kind that says, "I see what you're doing, and I think it matters." Jamie would smile at him every time, a quick wave with a juice box in hand. Frank always nodded back one small, stiff movement, as if anything more would be too much. I never asked why he didn't come down, and he never asked why I kept showing up. But I think we both understood. Some walls don't fall with words. They soften, piece by piece, just by being seen and not judged for who you really are. The first whisper came from the cashier at the corner store. She didn't say it directly, just gave me a look when I placed 2 cans of tomato paste and a jar of smoked paprika on the counter. Then she smiled tight and said, "Mr. Walters has good taste. You must be cooking for him now, too?" It was the way she said too that made my stomach shift. By the next week, it wasn't whispers anymore. At the playground, a mom I barely knew leaned over and asked, "So, you and the Colonel? That's what folks call him, right?" I blinked. "What?" "Oh, don't be shy. Everyone's saying you're the reason he's funding the church kitchen. It's sweet, really, like a movie." I didn't answer. Just called Jamie and walked away before she could add a bow to her story. But it was already spreading. Suddenly, I wasn't the girl who handed out soup with her son. I was that young housekeeper with the old man on Sycamore Hill. They said I was charming him. Said the only reason that kitchen got fixed was because I smiled the right way, stirred soup with the right rhythm, wore jeans that still fit. As if generosity needed a reason other than decency. Frank never mentioned it, but I noticed the difference. The people who used to nod politely when I walked into church now kept their eyes on their hymnals. The pastor stopped asking if I needed anything, and one Thursday, the building manager handed me a typed notice. All unofficial food service must be paused pending review. They called it safety protocol, but I knew what it really was. Suspicion. A woman my age around a man like Frank? It didn't matter what we were actually doing. People already decided what made sense to them. I told myself it would pass. But later that night, when Jamie asked, "Mama, are we in trouble?" I realized it wasn't about me anymore. It never really was. And maybe that's when I decided something I couldn't take back. The next morning, I left my keys to Frank's house on the kitchen counter. No note. Just silence, my version of surrender. The notice went up on a Monday, typed, laminated, taped crooked to the back entrance of the church basement. Due to maintenance and program review, the fellowship hall will be temporarily closed until further notice. We apologize for the inconvenience. No one signed it, but I knew who'd pushed for it. The same people who smiled thin when I passed them in the grocery aisle, the same ones who turned our Wednesday soup night into a scandal no one would say out loud. They didn't need to accuse us of anything, they just needed to make it look like something. Frank didn't say much when I told him, just stared at the note I pulled from my pocket, the corner soft with wear. Then he said, "They ever shut that place down when old Mrs. Patterson hosted bridge club with 4 crockpots and no permits?" I gave a sad laugh. Guess soup's more dangerous when I'm the one stirring it. We didn't talk after that. He stayed quiet. I stayed gone. That Wednesday, Jamie kept asking why we weren't going to the church. "Is it because of the stove?" he asked, pulling at his backpack straps. "No," I said. "The stove's fine." He looked at me with those big brown eyes, the ones he got from his dad. "Then why?" "Because kindness makes people uncomfortable when it doesn't come with a uniform. Because an old man helping a young woman can't be just that. Because people would rather believe in gossip than grace." I didn't say any of that. I just said, "Sometimes people forget what matters." That night, Jamie set 2 paper bowls on our kitchen table, one in front of his seat, and one at the empty chair we kept for guests who never came. He poured water into both. "I'm pretending it's soup," he said. I couldn't stop the tears then. Not for me. Not even for him. But for the quiet room where 15 people no longer sat, where warmth had once spilled from a single pot and made strangers feel like maybe, just maybe, they belonged somewhere again. And now? The doors were locked, and the silence was back. I didn't quit out loud. There was no scene, no confrontation, just a quiet morning, a folded note, and a key left where I knew he'd find it. On the windowsill above the sink, our unofficial meeting place. I told myself it was the right thing. The only thing. People had already made up their minds about us. Every hour I spent in that house felt heavier, like I was dragging both our reputations behind me. And Jamie, he was starting to hear things at school. Little comments. Kids repeat what they hear at home. I couldn't let that happen. Not again. So I stepped back. Out of the kitchen. Out of the story. I took extra shifts at the laundromat. Cleaned offices at night. Anything to make rent and keep my head down. Weeks passed. I avoided Sycamore Hill. Jamie stopped asking why. Kids adapt faster than adults do. Then one Tuesday, a letter came. No return address. Just my name on the front, in the kind of handwriting people used when they were taught penmanship in wartime. Inside was a single page, folded twice. May, I've learned a few things in my life, most of them the hard way. I've learned that silence can be louder than shouting, and that standing still is sometimes more meaningful than running towards something. I've also learned that it's possible to miss someone even when you never really knew them. I never asked much about your life. You didn't offer, and I respected that. But I saw the way your boy watched you, like you hung the moon. I saw the way you stirred soup with your whole body, like you were praying over every bite. I saw what it cost you to keep showing up. And you still did. I don't care what they say. Let them whisper. Let them guess. I'm too old to need their permission. But I understand why you left. This house is quieter now, but it's not empty, because you left something behind in the way you moved through it, with purpose and care and grace when no one was watching. If you ever want to come back, not to work, not to explain, just to sit, I'll leave the porch light on. No questions. Just tea. F. I read it twice, then 3 more times. Jamie found me at the kitchen table, eyes red, letter folded in my hand. Was it from the Colonel? He asked. I nodded. Is he mad? No, I whispered. He's not mad. I looked out the window, up toward the hill where that old house sat behind the trees. And for the first time in weeks, I thought about going back, not because I had to, but because maybe I wanted to. The call came at 7:12 in the morning. Jamie had just spilled milk on his spelling workbook, and I was mid-sigh when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Oregon area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me said, "Pick it up." "Ms. Bennett?" a woman asked, voice clipped but not unkind. "I'm calling from Pine Ridge Medical. You're listed as an emergency contact for a Mr. Franklin Walters." My stomach dropped. I'm not family," I said. "He insisted," she replied. "He's stable, minor stroke, he's asking for you." I didn't remember saying yes, just throwing Jamie's backpack in the car, calling my neighbor to watch him, and driving the 15 minutes to the hospital like I was in someone else's story. Frank looked smaller in the bed, like the man I knew had deflated and folded inward. His left hand trembled slightly. His eyes were tired, but sharp. He didn't smile when he saw me, but he did say, "Took you long enough." I sat beside him. Let the silence be the hello. The nurse came in with a clipboard. "We don't have any next of kin on file," she said. "He didn't list anyone except you." I glanced at Frank. He looked away. "No children?" I asked quietly after she left. "One son," he said. "We haven't spoken since '09. "Why me?" He shrugged. "Didn't know who else to call." It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't romantic or poetic. But it was real. And in that small, sterile room with the faint beeping of machines in the background, I realized something. He didn't need saving. He just didn't want to be alone. And for once, neither did I. The first time I brought Jamie to see Frank at home, he brought his crayons and asked if he could draw on the table. Frank said, "It's just wood," and handed him a placemat. That was about as warm as it got, but it was a start. Frank had been discharged with strict instructions: rest, no stress, daily meds. I offered to help for a few days, not because I felt obligated, but because there was something in his eyes when I walked into that hospital room. Something tired, something relieved. So I came back, not as his housekeeper, not really as a friend either, something in between. He hated the walker but used it, hated the way the pills made him drowsy, but took them. When I offered to cook, he said yes. When I folded his laundry, he didn't argue. We moved around each other with a rhythm that had taken months to build before, and only days to pick up again. Jamie was quieter around him now, less playful, more observant. But kids have a sense for who's safe. And Frank, in his gruff, unsmiling way, made Jamie feel safe. One afternoon, while I was out back hanging towels to dry, I peeked through the kitchen window and saw them sitting together at the table. Frank was showing Jamie how to hold a pencil properly. Not a word was spoken, just the sound of graphite scratching on paper, and Frank's large, trembling hand gently adjusting Jamie's grip. That night, Jamie told me, "He doesn't smile a lot, but he listens." "He does," I said. "That's one of his better tricks." The days turned into a week, the week into 2. I started bringing groceries again. Nothing dramatic, just the things I knew he liked. Sweet corn. The rye crackers he pretended weren't his favorite. Apples, always cold from the fridge. He never said thank you. He didn't have to. One morning, I walked in and found a set of keys on the counter. New ones, with a tag that said, "Kitchen, side door." I didn't ask what he meant by that. I just took them, and stayed. Frank was never one for words. No grand speeches. No life lessons. Just nods, gestures, and the occasional grunt that somehow meant more than full sentences. But I started to notice the things he didn't say. He never asked when I'd be leaving. He never commented when I used his kitchen like it was mine. He didn't flinch when Jamie scattered Legos across the living room rug, or when we played music too loud while making grilled cheese on Sunday afternoons. One evening, I came into the living room to find the old recliner gone. In its place was a second armchair. Smaller, newer, not quite matching, but intentionally placed right next to his. When I looked at him, he just said, "Recliner squeaked." That was it. But we both knew it wasn't about the recliner. It was about making space. For me. For Jamie. For something that wasn't just survival anymore. Another day, I caught him folding Jamie's hoodie and placing it carefully on the back of the couch. Not tossing it. Folding it. With both hands. He thought no one saw. I did. He started keeping extra cereal in the cupboard. Jamie's kind. Bought a set of plastic cups with cartoon animals on them. Said they were on sale. They weren't. One morning, I came downstairs to find him staring at the photo frame on the fireplace mantel. Inside was a picture of a young man in uniform, his son, I assumed. I'd never asked, and he'd never offered. He noticed me watching and said, "He never came back for the holidays." Then he walked away. That was how Frank shared. In fragments. In pauses. But it was enough. One night, after Jamie had gone to bed, we sat out back under the porch light. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then he handed me a blanket and said, "You know, the quiet used to feel safe. Now it just feels long." I didn't say anything. I just wrapped the blanket around both of us and let the silence stretch, not empty, but full of everything we couldn't name. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. I wasn't there because he needed me. I was there because I wanted to be. Because even in his quiet, even in his stillness, Frank Walters had become the first place in years that felt like more than just a stopgap. He felt like a choice, and I was ready to choose him back. There's a photo I keep tucked in an old cookbook between the pages with the banana bread recipe Ryan loved but never made. It's faded now, edges curled, the ink a little smudged where I once cried on it without meaning to. Jamie's maybe 9 months old in the picture. sitting between me and Ryan on a ratty old picnic blanket we'd borrowed from a friend who moved out of state. We'd gone to the park with a thrift store sandwich press, half a watermelon, and not enough sunscreen. Ryan's got sunglasses in his hair and jelly on his shirt. I'm mid-laugh, trying to keep Jamie from eating a dandelion. And Jamie, he's just beaming. That gummy, wide-open baby grin. Pure light. It's the only photo of all three of us together. I hadn't looked at it in a long time, not properly. But one afternoon, while looking for a recipe in Frank's kitchen, I found myself reaching for that old book. I hadn't even realized I'd brought it over. Funny how your hands sometimes know what your heart's ready for before your head catches up. I pulled out the photo, held it in the sunlight. For a second, I was right back there, sweaty, broke, laughing too hard, believing that love, somehow, would be enough to outrun everything we didn't have. It wasn't. But that moment was real. And that matters. I didn't notice Frank behind me until he cleared his throat. "Is that your boy?" he asked, nodding toward the picture. I turned the frame toward him. "That's Jamie. That's Ryan, his dad." Frank didn't ask what happened. He just looked at it for a long time, then said quietly, "He looks like you." I almost said no. He looks like Ryan, but then I realized maybe he looks like both of us. Maybe he looks like hope we held for a while and had to let go. I slipped the photo back in the book, between pages 38 and 39. I didn't cry. I just stood there with a small ache in my chest and the strange warmth of knowing that grief, when shared even silently, hurts a little less. It took me a few days to notice. The kitchen had always been Frank's domain. Clean, orderly, practical. Every spice in alphabetical order. Every drawer labeled. The kind of kitchen where nothing changed unless there was a reason. But that Friday, as I was prepping vegetables for stew, something on the far wall caught my eye. It was a new picture frame. Simple black wood, matte finish, hung just above the light switch near the pantry. I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped closer. And there it was. The photo. Our photo. Me, Ryan, and Jamie on that old blanket, squinting into the sun, laughing, messy, whole. I stared at it for a long time. He hadn't cropped it, hadn't centered just Jamie. He'd framed the whole thing. All of us. Even Ryan. Even that part of me. The part most people politely ignored. I turned around, unsure what to say. Frank wasn't in the kitchen, but his mug was on the table, still steaming. He'd done this on purpose. Left it for me to find. That was his way. I found him in the garage later, organizing a box of wires like it mattered. "You hung it," I said. He didn't look up. Didn't seem right leaving it in a book. I waited. "It's your kitchen now, too," he added, almost too quiet to hear. Those 6 words hit harder than any apology ever could. He didn't ask if it was okay. Didn't make it sentimental. Just made space. Not for the version of me that cleaned his counters and poured his tea, but for the version with history, with pain, with a love lost and a child to raise and a photo that used to hurt too much to look at. "I didn't think anyone would ever frame that," I said. He shrugged. "Seemed like a good picture." And that was that. But from that day on, whenever I cooked in that kitchen, I'd glance at the photo. Not every time. Just enough. It reminded me that my life didn't start over when I walked into Frank's house. It carried forward with all its dents, all its color, all its weight, and now it hung right there on the wall, not hidden, not forgotten, but seen. It came in the mail on a Tuesday afternoon, a plain white envelope from the town council with the words, "Kitchen clearance approved," stamped in bold across the top. I held it like it might disappear. The church basement was officially reopened. Permits in place. Sign-offs secured. The stove Frank had installed now had a sticker on it that said certified. He chuckled when I showed him. All it took was 6 forms, 4 inspections, and 3 people deciding not to care where the carrots came from. We celebrated with grilled cheese sandwiches and too much butter. That weekend, Jamie brought home a drawing from school. Crayons on construction paper, folded in quarters and smudged with lunch stains. He handed it to Frank like it was a diploma. "I made this for you," he said. Frank unfolded it slowly. It was a picture of the church kitchen, bright yellow walls, pots steaming on the stove. And right in the middle stood a tall figure with silver hair, holding a giant soup ladle like a sword. Across the top, in wobbly handwriting, were the words, "The Kitchen Knight." Jamie beamed. "You're like a knight, but not the fighting kind. The helping kind." Frank stared at it for a long moment. Then he cleared his throat and said, "He got my nose wrong." Jamie laughed. I didn't know how to draw old people noses. Frank nodded seriously. "Smart choice." We pinned it to the fridge that night, not with magnets, but with tape, because Jamie said it had to stay forever. And every time I saw it after that, I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just a drawing. It was proof that even without armor or a title or the right age or timing, a man could still become something good in the eyes of a child. And in the quiet corners of my heart, I knew he'd become something good in mine too. We named it Noah's Table, after a man who hadn't stepped foot inside a church in years, but had never missed a soup night since the beginning. Noah had passed the month before, quietly, alone, in the same coat he always wore, the same boots with the worn-out soles. When I got the news, it felt like someone had unplugged a lamp. Not dramatic, just dimmer. So when the church board finally gave us the green light to start officially hosting meals again, I asked if we could name it for him. The pastor blinked like I'd asked something unusual, then said, "It's your kitchen now. Do what feels right." We did. We made flyers, nothing fancy. Jamie drew little bowls of soup in the corners. I called it a table for anyone who's hungry, for food, for warmth, for company. Frank didn't say much about it, but the night before, he stayed up late sanding the wooden bench by the entrance, muttering that people shouldn't sit on splinters. The first night of Noah's Table, the kitchen smelled like rosemary and garlic and melted butter. Jamie helped set the tablecloth ones this time, with real napkins and little vases of fake flowers I found in a clearance bin. By 6 o'clock, the basement was full. Not just the regulars. Mr. Cal, Ruth with the oxygen tank, the quiet veteran who always gave his bread to someone else, but new faces, too. Families, teens, an elderly couple who lived 3 blocks down and said they'd always wondered what was going on in this old place. Frank stood by the door, not saying much, just nodding as people came in, watching the room fill like someone checking troop formation. He didn't need to say anything. He was the reason that stove worked, the reason that door was open. Everyone knew it, even if he'd never admit it. Midway through the night, Jamie grabbed the ladle from me and whispered, "Can I serve Mr. Frank?" He walked over, bowl in hand, and said, "You built this, right?" Frank looked down at him, one eyebrow raised. "Built what?" "This whole place. Mama makes the soup, but you made the space. That's big." Frank blinked once, then took the bowl with both hands. "That's teamwork," he said. Jamie grinned. Just like knights and their helpers. And for the first time in a long while, Frank actually smiled. Not just with his mouth, but with his whole face. The kind of smile that says, "Maybe this is what I was meant to do all along." And just like that, Noah's table wasn't just about feeding people. It was about belonging. For all of us. It was Jamie who asked him to speak. The second week of Noah's table, right after the cleanup crew had started stacking chairs and folding tablecloths, Jamie tugged Frank's sleeve and said, "You should say something. You're the boss." Frank blinked at him like he'd been handed a live microphone and a grenade at the same time. "I'm not the boss," he muttered. Jamie shrugged. "You're the oldest. That counts." That night, as people were gathering their coats and leftover bread, Frank cleared his throat near the piano. No one was expecting it. The room didn't go silent right away. But slowly, the sound of chairs scraping and plastic containers closing faded into a hush. Frank stood there, one hand on the back of a chair, the other holding a paper napkin he didn't seem to know what to do with. "I don't talk much," he started, voice low, steady. "Never been the speech-giving type." Someone chuckled. He didn't. "I served 31 years in uniform," he said. "Lost more friends than I care to count. Lost a wife who knew how to make my coffee just right. And a son who stopped answering my calls a long time ago." His voice didn't crack, but the room held its breath. "For a long time, I thought grief meant keeping things quiet. Strong, contained, like sandbags against a flood." He paused. "But then I met a woman who cooks like every meal is a second chance." He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. "And a kid who thinks I'm a knight just because I can hold a ladle without dropping it." People smiled. Jamie beamed. "I didn't build this kitchen for charity," Frank said. "I built it because I needed to believe that broken things could still hold warmth, that old, tired people could still matter." Silence. Thick and real. "So, if you're here tonight and you've lost something, or someone, or even just yourself, stay. Come back. Eat. Stir the pot. Fold the chairs. You don't have to say a word." He nodded once. "That's all." There was no applause. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that wraps around you like a wool coat on a cold night. Later, as I wiped down the counter, Frank walked by and said, without looking up, "I didn't say your name. Hope that's all right." I smiled. "You didn't have to." Her name was Lorraine Keller. Widow. Former school board chair. Sharp-tongued, pressed blouses. Always carried a leather-bound planner like it was armor. She used to sit in the back pew on Sundays with her hands folded so tight they looked carved from stone. I'd seen her in the early days at soup nights, always standing, never eating, watching, measuring. So when she showed up one Thursday afternoon, heels clicking down the church basement stairs like a metronome, I braced myself. She was holding a folder. "I read the inspection report," she said without greeting. "Impeccable. Whoever installed that ventilation system should be charging double." "Thank you," I said, cautious. She looked around at the tiled floor, the gleaming stove, the stack of fresh produce delivered that morning. Then her eyes landed on the drawing Jamie had pinned to the fridge, the kitchen knight. "I wasn't sure about this," she said. Frank stepped forward, hands in his pockets. "No one asked you to be." She held his gaze. "I wasn't sure about this," she repeated, firmer. "But I'm sure about her." She turned to me. "My sister was one of the regulars before she passed last year. She told me, 'That girl with the soup spoon sees people no one else does.'" I swallowed. She said it was the only place she felt like a name, not a problem. Lorraine opened the folder. Inside was a stack of papers, official double-spaced, signed in blue ink. "I called in a few favors," she said. "As of today, Noah's Table is formally registered as a community-based meal initiative under City Code. You have full permission to operate, with permanent access to the kitchen space. No more reviews, no more warnings. She placed the papers on the counter like a judge passing down a sentence, except this one tasted like freedom. Frank blinked. Why now? She didn't answer him. She looked at Jamie instead. Because he'll grow up remembering this place, and we don't get to decide what lasts in a child's memory, but we can shape what deserves to. Then, without another word, she walked out. We stood there in stunned silence for a moment. Jamie whispered, "Does this mean we get to stay forever?" I smiled. As long as people are hungry, yes. Frank didn't say anything. But later that night, I saw him lingering in the doorway again, watching the pots bubble, watching Jamie draw a new picture of Knight Frank with a soup pot for a shield, and for the first time, I think he believed it was real, not just borrowed time, but ours. A year can pass like fog. You don't notice it slipping through until one morning you wake up and everything looks different. Softer, quieter, a little further from where you began. Jamie was taller now. His jeans no longer reached his ankles. His backpack, once too big, now fit just right. He still brought crayons to Noah's Table, but now he also brought questions, big ones. Do people always stay kind? Why do some grown-ups eat alone? Is Mr. Frank going to be here forever? I never knew how to answer the last one. Frank still came every week. He sat by the prep table now instead of standing. A cane rested near his chair. His hands shook more than they used to, and sometimes he repeated a story without realizing he'd told it already. But his eyes, still sharp, still watching, still proud. Every Wednesday at 4:30 sharp, he'd show up in that same pressed shirt and old military jacket, nod at whoever was setting tables, and sit quietly, like the building didn't fully unlock until he arrived. He didn't serve anymore. Not food, at least. But when Jamie forgot which drawer held the ladles, Frank would point. When someone new arrived looking lost, he'd nod them toward the back table, the one we always kept open for first-timers. The BEP still ran. Better than ever. Word had spread. Some weeks we served 30 people. A woman from the local paper wrote a feature calling it, "A Quiet Miracle in a Quiet Town." Frank cut the article out, folded it into his wallet like it was a secret he wanted to protect. Jamie started calling it Home Number 2. Not the building, not the program, the room. "This is where people become nicer," he said once. "They don't even know they're doing it." I watched him hand soup to a teenager with headphones and a bruised lip. No judgment, just warmth. Maybe that's what happens when kids grow up around something good. It gets into their bones. And maybe that's what was happening to me, too. The grief never left, but it softened. The edges weren't as sharp. Some nights I still caught myself reaching for my old photo like a reflex. But more often, I found myself reaching for Frank's hand instead. It had grown colder these past few months. In the room, and in him. His steps slower, his voice raspier. But he was still there, still showing up, still choosing us. And that was a kind of love I'd never known before. Frank passed on a Sunday morning. Peacefully, they said. I got the call just after breakfast. The nurse who'd been checking in on him twice a week said he'd gone quietly, sitting in his recliner by the window with a cup of tea still warm beside him and Jamie's latest drawing resting on his lap. I drove to his house alone. Jamie stayed with the neighbors. I couldn't bring myself to bring him, not yet. The living room looked untouched, shoes still neatly aligned by the door, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the arm of the couch, the photo of me, Ryan, and baby Jamie still hanging in the kitchen. But the house felt still, like it had exhaled something it had been holding on to for too long. On the dining table, next to a tin of mints and his glasses, was a letter, my name written in blocky, uneven handwriting. I sat down before I opened it. May, I never liked long goodbyes. So if you're reading this, know I went how I wanted. Quiet, clean, no fuss. You gave me more than kindness. You gave me purpose. You and that kid of yours reminded me what it feels like to be useful again. To be seen, not just remembered. I know you'll keep the kitchen going. That part doesn't worry me. What does worry me is this. Don't let the world talk you out of the good you carry. Not everyone will understand it, but those who need it will feel it. The ladle's yours now. And don't argue. I labeled it on the back just in case. Tell Jamie I kept every single one of his drawings in the drawer under the radio, even the one where he gave me a mustache I don't have. Keep stirring, May. There's still a lot of people out there who don't know they're hungry until someone gives them a place to sit. Frank, I didn't cry right away. I sat there, holding that note like it might dissolve, and I whispered, "Thank you," to the empty room. 2 days later, we reopened Noah's table, just like he would have wanted. Jamie stood beside me, ladle in hand, wearing the apron Frank had once insisted was too frilly for a real man. We both wore it anyway. Before we served, Jamie climbed onto a chair and tapped a spoon against his juice cup. "I made something," he said, holding up a new picture. It showed Frank, standing tall in the kitchen, soup ladle raised like a torch. Behind him were bowls, people, warmth, light, and above it all, in careful, capital letters, "Sir Frank, the kitchen stays open." We pinned it next to the first one he ever made, and that night we served 39 people, laughed, refilled bowls, gave seconds, no music, no speeches. But the warmth was there, still is, because some legacies don't need statues or plaques, just a stove that stays hot, a table that stays set, and a little boy who remembers exactly how a night is supposed to love. It was almost dusk when I stepped outside and pulled the chain to turn on the porch light. Same bulb Frank had insisted on replacing himself. Said LEDs took the soul out of a warm glow. I never replaced it. The church basement was quiet now. The folding chairs stacked neatly, the soup pots washed and drying. Jamie had gone home early with the neighbors, tired after an evening of handing out bread rolls and correcting everyone's posture with the ladle. I stayed behind. Sometimes I do that, just to listen to the quiet when it's finally kind. We'd served 44 people tonight. One woman cried over tomato bisque and said it reminded her of the last meal her sister ever made. A teenage boy stayed late to help sweep and didn't ask for anything in return. A man I'd never seen before came in with shoes 2 sizes too big and left with a to-go bag and a smile so small it barely showed, but I saw it. These were Frank's people, and now, I guess they're mine. I stepped out to the old wooden door that led to the alley, the side entrance our entrance, the one Frank had a key made for me, long before I realized what it meant. Above the door, hung by 2 small nails, was a new sign Jamie and I made that morning. Simple wood, hand-carved letters burned in dark. For those we still remember. We debated painting it. In the end, we left it bare, the way Frank probably would have preferred it. Solid, quiet, honest. I stood there for a while, fingers grazing the edges of the sign, the grain rough beneath my thumb, And I thought about all the things I used to be afraid of being misunderstood, of being talked about, of being alone forever, of needing someone too late. But standing there under the porch light he left for me, I knew this wasn't a story about fear. It was a story about staying, about choosing to stay, even when it's easier to leave. Frank once asked me, "If I were someone else, poorer, younger, different, would you have stayed?" I never answered out loud. But maybe this, all of it, is my answer. He wasn't someone else. And I stayed anyway. Because what he gave wasn't youth or ease or charm. It was quiet loyalty. A chair pulled out, a photo framed, a ladle passed down. A space made wide enough for grief, for joy, for soup, for second chances. I looked up at the sign once more. The wood was already catching the last bit of sun, and in the hush of that golden hour, with the door behind me and the whole long night ahead, I let myself whisper what I'd never dared say to his face. A promise, a prayer, a thank you. I remember you.